Hello, glad to see you on the channel. Subscribe, give a like, and don't forget to leave a comment. Enjoy watching.
My manager laughed when he fired me. In front of the whole damn team. No office, no privacy, not even a heads up. Just looked me dead in the eye, said, "Sorry, Jeff, it's just business," and smiled like he was doing me a favor. I didn't say a word. I just stood there, watching him bask in his little power trip while everyone else avoided eye contact and pretended to be busy typing. It was a Thursday. I remember that because Thursday used to be bagel day. I came in early, like I always did, brewed the first pot of coffee, and was halfway through my usual inbox triage when the calendar ping hit. Mandatory all hands, conf room B, 9 a.m. No agenda. Just a quick invite from Carl, the guy who wore $600 shoes and talked about synergy like it was a religion. I figured it'd be another one of his pointless motivational stand-ups. Maybe a new initiative, maybe more talk about streamlining. I didn't expect to be the headliner. Conf Room B was already crowded when I walked in. People were standing against the walls, eyes glued to their phones. Carl was up front, leaning against the whiteboard, sipping his iced coffee with that smug, chin-up posture he thought made him look like a leader. He gave me a nod when I walked in, not a friendly one, more like a nod you give to a guy you just ran over in the parking lot. Then he launched right into it. As part of our ongoing restructuring process, he began, we're making some strategic changes to better align with our Q3 targets and beyond. That was the first red flag. Carl only used that kind of buzzword salad when he was about to do something shady and didn't want anyone to question it. He kept talking about optimization, cost efficiency, shifting priorities, and then, casually, like he was announcing a change in coffee suppliers, he said, "One of the decisions we've made involves eliminating the project integration manager role, currently held by Jeff Conway, effective immediately." There was a pause, just silence. And then he smiled, actually smiled, looked straight at me and said, "Jeff, we appreciate your years of service, but unfortunately this is the nature of the business. It's just business." I stood there for a full 3 seconds, not moving, not blinking, just watching him. I heard someone inhale behind me. Someone else cleared their throat. Carl clapped his hands like he was wrapping up a slideshow and said, "All right, moving forward." Moving forward. Just like that. I wasn't even out the door yet, and they were already moving on. I didn't say a thing. No outburst, no big speech. I didn't want to give Carl the satisfaction. I walked out, calm as hell, like I was just heading out for lunch, picked up my jacket from the back of my chair, grabbed my keys, and left my corporate badge sitting dead center on my desk like a tombstone. By the time I hit the parking garage, I was shaking. Not because I didn't see it coming, but because of the way it happened. The public theater of it, the showy power move. Carl didn't just want me gone, he wanted me humiliated. He wanted the rest of the team to see what happened when you got too old, too expensive, too unwilling to kiss his ring. And here's the kicker. I'd built that department from the ground up. I was the guy who stayed late fixing rollout bugs while Carl was still making motivational TikToks for his side hustle. I'd trained half the people sitting in that room, but none of them said a word, not one. They just sat there pretending they didn't see what was happening because they were too scared they'd be next. I drove home with the windows down, trying to cool off, and my phone buzzed with a "Sorry, man" text from a guy I used to mentor. That was it. That was the total fallout from 15 years of service. One cold smirk and a pity text. Here's the thing, though. I didn't lose it because I was fired. I knew Carl had been gunning for me since day one. The minute he took over, he started trimming people who didn't fit his shiny vision, and I wasn't exactly his brand of polished bootlicking yes-man. But the way he did it, that smug little chuckle in front of everyone, like he'd just scored a point in some invisible game, that burned. That stayed with me. So I didn't reply to the text. I didn't go online and start ranting. I didn't call Carl and demand an explanation. I sat at home that night with a beer and started going through my backups. Emails, project notes, Slack messages, recordings. Because while Carl thought he'd ended my story, what he didn't realize was that I had quietly started writing a new one the day he joined the company. And this one had a hell of a twist. What would you do if your boss stabbed you in the back like that, in front of everyone, and laughed while doing it? Would you walk away quietly or make sure he never forgot your name? The next morning, I woke up early out of habit, showered, put on the same collared shirt I always wore for work, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop like I was waiting for it to blink first. There was no inbox waiting, no schedule to follow, no calls to prepare for. Just a wide, empty silence that I hadn't felt in years. I spent most of that morning trying to wrap my head around how it had all unraveled so quickly. One day, I'm leading the rollout on a major logistics integration for our West Coast distribution, and the next I'm being dismissed like an expired parking ticket without so much as a private conversation. Around 10, I got the email from HR. It was short, sterile, and full of language that sounded like it was copy-pasted from a company handbook last updated in 2007. They thanked me for my contributions, expressed regret that circumstances required a shift in strategic resources, and included a link to a PDF titled Separation Agreement. Jeff Conway, Final. I didn't even get a call. Not a courtesy check-in, just a damn link. I clicked it, scrolled through the legal jargon, and saw they were offering me a 3-month severance, on the condition that I agreed not to sue, talk about the company publicly, or say anything that could be interpreted as negative in perpetuity. The gall of it nearly made me laugh. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to see who else would reach out. Maybe someone from my team. Maybe even Carl himself. I waited all day. Nothing. Just silence. Not even a "how are you holding up" from people I'd worked late nights with for years, people whose weddings I had attended, people who used to ask for my advice on everything from project plans to career growth. The kind of people I thought would at least shoot me a text. Instead, I got ghosted like an ex after a breakup gone bad. No one called, no one emailed, no one so much as liked the retirement post HR put up on the internal bulletin. Yeah, they actually called it a retirement announcement, like I was a beloved old librarian being put out to pasture. That was the moment it really hit me. I'd never been part of the team. Not really. I was a cog that kept the machine running, and now that the machine had a new driver with a flashier dashboard and shinier buttons, they didn't need a guy like me under the hood anymore. And they weren't even hiding it. They were just hoping I'd take the check, disappear quietly, and leave them to bask in their own efficiency. But here's what they didn't know. I'd seen it coming. Carl started making his moves the moment he settled into his oversized glass office. At first, it was little things. I stopped getting calendar invites to key meetings. He started handing my responsibilities to younger analysts who used buzzwords like value stack and operational velocity, but couldn't manage a deadline without crying to support. Then he started asking me to document everything I was doing, every process, every workflow, every team instruction. I thought maybe he was just trying to learn the ropes, but I should have known better. That wasn't onboarding, that was groundwork for a handoff. And so, months ago, I started covering myself. I saved copies of my project plans, tracked edits on shared files, screenshotted Slack conversations where Carl joked about bringing in fresher energy. I even recorded a Zoom call, legally, by the way, where he told me he wanted to trim the legacy fat. I wasn't paranoid, I was just paying attention. So while they were busy cutting me out, I was busy collecting evidence. Not because I was planning to sue, at least not then, but because something in me knew Carl wasn't just trying to modernize the company. He was trying to erase the people who had built it before he showed up. People like me. By the end of the week, I had a folder on my desktop called Insurance that included everything from performance reviews showing I'd exceeded targets for 6 straight quarters, to emails where Carl took credit for work I had personally executed. There were even memos where he referred to me by name while outlining initiatives I hadn't been looped in on, which, as any lawyer will tell you, looks a whole lot like targeted exclusion. And still, no one from my team reached out. I saw them online, logging into LinkedIn, liking company updates, attending Zoom coffee breaks, and resharing Carl's post about embracing a new chapter of innovation. One of them even posted a selfie with Carl at a Friday happy hour captioned, "Love working with inspiring leaders who value progress." I nearly threw my phone across the room. I wasn't mad they didn't take my side. I wasn't even mad they stayed silent. I was mad because I had given these people my time, my energy, my nights, my weekends, my experience, and the moment I was no longer useful, they acted like I never existed. That was the part I couldn't shake. The corporate system doesn't punish you with pink slips and exit interviews. It punishes you with silence. It unplugs you from the world you gave everything to and waits for you to vanish. They don't want to fight. They want forgetfulness. They want you to accept your fate, sign the NDA, and go garden or take up woodworking while they erase your contributions with a cheery Slack message about new opportunities. But I wasn't about to let that happen. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but I knew this much. I wasn't going to sign away my voice just because Carl wanted a cleaner narrative. Not after the way he fired me. Not after the way they all just stood there and watched. And not after what I found in that email chain he thought I'd deleted. The third day after the firing was when the anger finally settled into something sharper, colder, and far more focused. That's when I called Marcus. Now, I don't lean on family much, and Marcus isn't the type of guy you call unless you mean business. He married my sister back in 2009 and immediately became the kind of brother-in-law that other men either love or hate. Charming, dangerously smart, and always 2 steps ahead in every conversation. He's the guy you want in your corner if the stakes are high and someone's trying to screw you over with a handshake and a legal clause. Marcus is an employment attorney, the aggressive kind, the kind corporate HR departments whisper about after hours and hope never to see on a letterhead. When I told him what happened, he didn't interrupt. He just let me talk, asked a few questions here and there, and took notes the whole time. I told him everything. How Carl had come in with a messiah complex and started pruning the department like it was a dying tree. How he replaced seasoned project leads with college grads who could barely manage their own email folders, and how he made it crystal clear, through casual jokes and loaded feedback, that people over 45 were not part of his long-term vision. Marcus didn't flinch when I told him about the firing itself, but when I described the meeting, the public spectacle, the smug grin, the just business line delivered like a punchline, he raised his eyebrows and asked if anyone had recorded it. I said no, but that I'd taken notes afterward, and that I had the email chain that hinted at the meeting being planned without my input. That was enough to catch his interest. Then I told him about the Zoom recording, the one where Carl, while half drunk at a virtual team-building event, made a joke about clearing out the old guard before they forget where they parked. That was when Marcus actually leaned forward and grinned. From that point on, the conversation shifted. It stopped being a vent session and started feeling like strategy. Marcus began pulling threads, asking about every project I'd led over the past year, what documentation I had, who had taken over after my dismissal, and whether I'd received any formal performance warnings. I hadn't. In fact, I had glowing performance reviews from just a few months prior. My last quarterly evaluation had the words "indispensable leadership" in the summary paragraph. I emailed it to him while we were still on the phone. Then came the real kicker. I remembered a pitch deck I had developed for a client expansion in Phoenix. I'd spent 2 weekends fine-tuning that proposal, complete with logistics maps, cost projections, and strategic forecasts. It was a strong piece of work, one I was proud of, but I hadn't been allowed to present it. Carl pulled it last minute and said it needed fresh voices. That deck had disappeared from my folder. I hadn't thought much of it until now. I logged into the backup server I used to sync work files on my personal drive, a habit I picked up years ago after losing a proposal to a corrupted shared drive, and sure enough, there was my original version, time-stamped and complete. Then I checked the public investor presentation from last quarter, the one Carl and his new strategy team had used to impress the board. There it was, my work, my data, my words, even the same graphics I had made, copied and slapped with a new title page. I sent it to Marcus. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then he said, "Well, well, this just got interesting." What followed was a whirlwind of controlled preparation. Marcus explained that this wasn't just a wrongful termination, it had the makings of something bigger: potential age discrimination, intellectual property theft, retaliation for internal objections. I had enough material to give their legal team night sweats. He told me not to contact anyone at the company, not to respond to HR, and not to sign anything. Everything would go through him from now on. And let me tell you, there's something oddly comforting about hearing your own pain converted into legal terminology. Suddenly, the humiliation I'd swallowed in that conference room wasn't just a bad memory. It was a timeline, a narrative, a case. That weekend, I spent every waking hour combing through emails, Slack messages, project files, and internal memos. I built a folder structure that Marcus could work with, time-stamped everything, color-coded conversations by topic, and even included screenshots of feedback forms and calendar invites that conveniently stopped including me 2 weeks before the firing. I found inconsistencies, contradictions, and plenty of casual comments from Carl that painted a clear picture. I was being squeezed out, not because I failed, but because I no longer fit the image he was trying to sell to upper management. By the time we filed, the case was airtight. The papers went out on a Tuesday morning, quietly. No social media posts, no press. Just a neatly drafted, strongly worded notice delivered straight to the company's legal team. And then we waited. I wasn't sure how Carl would react. Part of me hoped he'd brush it off, laugh it away like he always did. But another part of me, the part that had known men like Carl for years, suspected he'd start sweating the moment someone smarter than him walked into the room with a folder and said, "We need to talk about Jeff Conway." Because Carl thought I was done. He thought I'd go away quietly, tail tucked between my legs, and leave him to enjoy his little empire of buzzwords and stolen credit. But what he didn't realize was that I wasn't just some bitter ex-employee with a grudge. I had patience, documentation, and now I had Marcus. And that was about to become his problem. The silence lasted exactly 9 days. For those 9 days, I heard nothing. Not a peep from HR, not a call from legal, not even one of those vague, politically correct, "we acknowledge receipt" emails that companies like to send when they've just been slapped with something that might spiral into a real problem. I wasn't surprised. It was classic delay and deflect protocol. They probably huddled in a windowless boardroom somewhere with their internal counsel, combing through policy binders and strategizing how to minimize the blowback. I imagined Carl pacing the room, running a hand through his carefully styled hair, assuring everyone that I didn't have anything real, just some bruised ego and a brother-in-law with a law degree. But by day 10, they knew it was more than that. The first indication came in the form of a formal letter, delivered by courier to Marcus's office, stamped with the firm's generic response language. They categorically denied all allegations, of course, but requested a meeting to explore an amicable resolution. Translation: they were spooked. That was Marcus's read, and he's not the type to read things optimistically. He told me to keep quiet, stay offline, and prepare for depositions. What followed over the next few weeks was something I can only describe as corporate unraveling. Slowly at first, then all at once. Carl, who had strutted around the office like a rooster in an overpriced blazer, suddenly disappeared from the internal Slack channels. His daily pep talk posts dried up. The man who once couldn't go 2 hours without sharing some pre-packaged wisdom about future-ready leadership went completely radio silent. I still had eyes on the inside, people I'd trained, people who hadn't completely lost their spines, and they started reaching out again, this time cautiously, nervously, like kids returning to a campfire after a bear wandered off. They told me whispers were starting. Legal was poking around. Leadership was conducting internal reviews. There was even a mandatory compliance refresher rolled out on a Friday afternoon, which, in corporate terms, is the equivalent of a fire drill during a thunderstorm. But it was the deposition that really broke the dam. Carl showed up late. He tried to hide his nerves behind that forced smirk of his, but the circles under his eyes told a different story. He was no longer the swaggering disruptor who had fired me with a quip and a wink. He was a man trying very hard not to trip over his own lies. Marcus opened the session calmly, professionally, laying out the timeline like it was any other day. But when he slid a printed screenshot across the table, an email Carl had sent to a fellow VP just 3 weeks before my firing, joking that Jeff's expiration date is coming up, that was the moment I saw the first real crack. Carl tried to laugh it off, said it was taken out of context, said it was just office humor. Marcus didn't blink. He moved on to the project pitch deck, the one I had authored in full, the one Carl had passed off as a team collaboration, in front of the board. We had side-by-side comparisons, metadata from the original file, even timestamps showing when Carl accessed it and when the final version was presented. There was no room to maneuver, no plausible deniability, just an uncomfortable silence, broken only by Carl's shifting in his seat and the quiet scratching of his own legal rep taking frantic notes. And that was just day one. The following week, 2 more former employees came forward. One had been quietly let go under similar circumstances, publicly praised 1 month, suddenly laid off the next, no cause given. Another had tried to report Carl for ethics violations the previous year, only to be reassigned to a lower position and eventually off-boarded during a so-called merger. Marcus brought them in under confidentiality, gathered sworn statements, and quietly added fuel to the growing fire. What started as a single wrongful termination claim was rapidly becoming a case study in systemic discrimination, hostile work environment, and deliberate exclusion of veteran employees. Carl, who had strutted into the company with promises of innovation and growth, was now the face of every dirty little secret festering in the organization's underbelly. And as more people talked, the image he had so carefully curated began to crumble. At one point, an internal memo leaked, an HR directive instructing managers to reevaluate roles that may no longer align with the company's forward-facing objectives, which sounded harmless enough until you realized every single person let go under that guideline was over 40 and had been with the company for over 10 years. We didn't leak that memo. Someone on the inside did. I never found out who. Maybe someone with a conscience. Maybe someone who finally saw Carl for what he was. By the time the internal investigation was confirmed, Carl was already gone. No farewell party, no LinkedIn post, no moving on to exciting new opportunities. Just a quiet removal from the directory and a vague company-wide email about a leadership transition. I got the screenshot from a former colleague who said the mood in the office that morning was somewhere between confusion and relief. Carl had always believed he was untouchable, that as long as he hit the right metrics and dazzled the board with just enough razzle-dazzle, the bodies he buried on the way up wouldn't matter. What he didn't count on was one of those bodies fighting back with receipts, legal counsel, and the kind of meticulous documentation that only comes from someone who spent his entire career building systems meant to withstand chaos. So, no, I didn't gloat. I didn't dance in the ashes or post a smug status update. But I did take one long walk around the block that evening, letting the breeze hit my face, knowing that the man who once laughed at my firing couldn't even look himself in the mirror without seeing the cracks. And the best part? We weren't even finished yet. It's strange how quiet everything feels when the dust finally settles. Not in a cinematic kind of way where dramatic music plays and a big speech wraps up the chaos, but in the kind of stillness that comes when you realize the fight you've been waging for weeks, months, maybe even years, is finally over, or at least as over as it's ever going to be. The day the settlement offer came through, Marcus just forwarded me the final draft with a single line of text that said, "They blinked." That was it. No exclamation marks, no legalese, no fireworks, just confirmation that the company, after all their bluster and denial and behind-the-scenes scrambling, had quietly decided to make it all go away with a sum that I never thought I'd see attached to my name in a wire transfer. The money was good. More than good, honestly. Enough to pay off the mortgage, take care of my son's remaining college tuition, and maybe take a few breaths without the panic that had started creeping into my mornings over the past couple of years. But what really stuck with me wasn't the number on the paper, it was what wasn't on it. There was no apology, no admission of wrongdoing, no acknowledgement of what had really happened. Just the standard language of settlements. Full and final resolution, no fault admitted, confidentiality enforced. They wanted it done and buried. They wanted to buy silence, control the narrative, and move on like none of it had ever happened. That's what these corporations always want. Clean slates, scrubbed timelines, no mess. I remember sitting at the kitchen counter that night, drink in hand, staring at the settlement document and thinking about the years I'd given them. Not just clocked hours or finished deliverables, but actual pieces of my life. Family time missed, weekends sacrificed, anxiety carried home like a weight strapped to my chest. I thought about how many times I defended that place, how many junior employees I talked down from burnout, how many long nights I spent fixing projects other people had botched, all in the name of professionalism, loyalty, and some outdated belief in being the kind of worker who shows up and does the right thing even when no one's watching. And then I thought about Carl. The last I heard, he had resigned to pursue other opportunities, which is corporate speak for was pushed out before the board could ask too many questions. He vanished from the company's site within 24 hours. His LinkedIn, once a shrine to buzzwords and inflated accomplishments, went dark. Mutual contacts stopped mentioning his name, and the few that did only offered quiet chuckles and cryptic comments like, "Yeah, things got weird." The empire he tried to build on stolen credit and arrogant charm collapsed the way all hollow structures do, quickly and without ceremony. I never saw him again. There was no confrontation, no final showdown, no angry parking lot exchange. Just silence. And in some ways, that was better. Because I know men like Carl. I've worked for them, around them, and sometimes despite them. They always think they're the smartest person in the room, always think rules are for other people, and always underestimate the ones who keep their heads down and do the work. The funny thing is, for a long time, I wasn't sure if any of this would feel like justice. There were moments, especially in the middle of it all, when it felt like I was just screaming into the wind, like nothing would ever change, and I'd just end up as another cautionary tale whispered around the office kitchen. But when the firm folded, when the leadership reshuffled, and when those emails and depositions started making the rounds behind closed doors, I realized it wasn't just about getting even, it was about being heard. It was about reminding them that people like me, people who give a damn, who do the work, who play it straight, aren't expendable. We're not relics. We're not roadblocks to progress. We're the reason those companies run at all. A few weeks after the dust settled, Marcus and I met up for coffee at a diner we used to hit, after court hearings back when he was still cutting his teeth. He ordered his usual, I ordered mine, and we sat there in the booth, two middle-aged guys who had just toppled a Goliath not with noise but with paperwork. He asked if I felt any different now that it was over. I said I wasn't sure. There was still a tightness in my chest that hadn't fully gone away, still a part of me that kept replaying the moment in that conference room when Carl smiled and took my dignity like it was part of his job description. But I also felt lighter, somehow. Not vindicated, not victorious, just steady. I told him I wasn't sure what I was going to do next. I had offers, some decent, some laughable, but for the first time in years, I wasn't in a rush. Maybe I'd consult. Maybe I'd teach. Maybe I'd finally write that book on project strategy that nobody asked for, but every junior manager probably needs. I didn't know. What I did know was that I wouldn't go back into a system that saw people as numbers, that sold the illusion of loyalty while quietly sharpening the knife behind its back. Before we left, Marcus pulled out his phone and showed me something. Carl's name was trending on a niche business news feed, not in a headline, not in a scandal, but in a quiet little update noting that he was no longer listed as a speaker for an upcoming tech summit. No reason given. Just removed, replaced by someone with fewer followers, but a less complicated background. I didn't say anything at first. I just looked at the screen and let the moment wash over me. Then I took a sip of my coffee, leaned back in the booth, and said, "You know, he was right about one thing." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? What's that?" I smiled, but it wasn't a warm one. It was just business. But the thing he never understood is that sometimes business gets personal. And for once, I wasn't the one walking out quietly.